All right, guys. So we are looking at civil rights and liberties. Let's go ahead and put that in present mode. All right. So we're going to be looking at how these have changed over time and what are your civil rights and liberties and how should they be enforced and how should they be protected. If I were to add one, I would say, what is the balance between freedom and order/security? I'm sure you are all familiar with this. Unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are the first rights that we really talk about as our nation, and they are kind of be an important thing to think about as we go forward with this. So the first thing is just the textbook difference between civil liberties and civil rights. Even I have a tendency to kind of use these interchangeably, and that's not the case. There is a difference. Civil liberties are what explicitly come from the Bill of Rights. Freedoms of cruel and unusual punishment, searches and seizures, your freedom of speech and religion and assembly, those things. Whereas your civil rights all come from the 14th Amendment, passed post-Civil War. And that's where your protections of equality come from under the law and your citizenship rights. We're going to talk about the 14th Amendment a lot. We'll talk about that in the slides to come. So, civil rights, civil liberties. These are your civil liberties. These are some of the big ones that we think of right away in the First Amendment. They're the Mac Daddy big rights. They're the ones we always want to talk about. I don't feel the need to read all this to you. The first 10 amendments of the Constitution are your Bill of Rights. And what's important to remember is that they are not absolute. We'll get to more on that here in a minute, but there are limits on these freedoms, even though they are so enshrined and protected. So in general, most people would claim to be supporters of your civil liberties and that are found in the Bill of Rights. But in practice, we're going to see that we're not always good at wanting to support them. So we're not always good about wanting to support free press or free speech. And we sometimes like to favor things like public order over these things as a society. And our way of interpreting these things has changed over time. You all are going to be looking at a Supreme Court cases from before and after the passage of the 14th Amendment, because initially the Bill of Rights was only a restriction on what the federal government could do, and in terms of making laws, because every state had their own Bill of Rights. The 14th Amendment incorporates those Bill of Rights to all citizens, to all states. So states cannot limit those rights. And we'll talk about that more in a bit, and we'll talk about incorporation later. But we're getting there. We're dwindling down. We're getting smaller and smaller as we go. Next slide, please. There we go. So the 14th Amendment, I keep talking about it. It's 4 key parts. The first big part is that it gives birthright citizenship to anyone born here. If you're born here, you're a citizen. The 13th Amendment freed the slaves. It outlawed slavery. Well, the 14th Amendment made them citizens. No questions. No state is allowed to abridge privileges and immunities, so the states can't make laws to limit any of your liberties found in the Bill of Rights. And no one can be denied the due process of law. This is where a lot of that incorporation comes from, where we talk about the Bill of Rights applying to each individual citizens as those being individual personal rights, not just things that the federal government can't make laws about. Going on, no person can be denied equal protection of the laws. This is the first time that equality shows up in the Constitution. This amendment is going to be one of the most cited in like federal court cases. Ruth Bader Ginsburg called it her favorite amendment. All right. Yeah. And again, states as well as federal powers subject to the Bill of Rights. Big shift there. Next slide, please. Don't know why I have to ask, but it seems to work better. All right. So looking in, we're going to look at those First Amendment rights. Got 3 super controversial images here, and those of you who are virtual will benefit better from this. This happened in the 60s, students protesting the Vietnam War, not long after 9/11, pushing for the legalization of marijuana. And in short, yes, this is constitutionally protected free speech. These are middle school students. Yes, this is constitutionally free expression and speech. The flag code is not law. It is merely a code. It is a set of suggestions. So you can do this in a form of protest, and it be free speech. Whether you agree with it or not, you have the right to do it. Down here, we have bong hits for Jesus. This was done at a school event, and these students were suspended. And the Supreme Court said, no, you do not have this right at school. Schools have the ability to restrict speech in this way. It distracts from education, a phrase that is very vague. And it promotes an illegal activity which schools have a right to fight against. So freedom of religion, everyone's favorite topic. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion. There can be no state religion. The government cannot favor one over the other. And I know some of you are saying, but they do. Well, back to that. We're a fan of these things in theory, but we're bad at them in practice. Legally, states and the federal government have to be committed to neutrality amongst religion. There can be no state religion. Your religion cannot be interfered with by the federal government. However, if your religion conflicts with others' rights or with the law, it is not protected. And we'll look at some cases about this. This is going to be a super Supreme Court heavy week, and I apologize. You're just going to have a lot of those write-ups to do, to talk about and remember, and flashcards are going to be your friends. The freedom of the press and the FCC. We talked about bureaucracy last week before last. And so the FCC is one of those bureaucratic agencies we talked about, and they have the power to control broadcast media. Yikes. So prior restraint is the idea that the government can't prevent material from being published. It's very much prohibited. However, it can be okay if national security could be compromised. And what is national security is just a huge debate. And we'll get to that at the end of this presentation. We'll start talking about that some. So commercial speech, so anything that's like an ad or for public consumption, is going to likely be the most censored and the most tightly regulated and controlled, especially the radio. Radio is like the most controlled form of communication that we have. However, these restrictions have to be narrowly tailored. It's really hard to fight the FCC. Personal experience here. Yikes. Don't want to deal with it. Speech is generally protected. The court tries to protect free speech as much as possible. However, speech that presents any kind of clear and present danger is not protected. So you can't shout fire in a crowded theater or say bomb in an airport or something like that. You could even, like this one, advocate the overthrow of the government, but you can't incite anyone to do it. Yeah, you can read. So the freedom of the press becomes an interesting thing when it conflicts with the idea of like a fair trial, because too much coverage of a trial can interfere with how fair or how unbiased a trial is. And this becomes a huge nightmare. And we'll get into this in a later week, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But all you really need to know is typically the idea that the public has a right to the information is upheld. And again, this is definitely not straightforward. Next slide, please. Obscenity is another thing that's censored. Um, I know some of you are going to love the phrase, I know it when I see it. What is obscene? A lot of the times, in most cases, it's simply if it's sexual or somehow can be deemed to be lacking any serious literary, artistic, or political scientific value. It's so vague. We've moved away from this now. This was in the 70s. And it's just fascinating to me how our views of these things have changed over time and how our acceptance of such a thing as I'll know it when I see it has changed. So, again, there is restrictions on things like libel and slander, which is attacking someone's reputation or their character. Libel is when it's in print. Don't quote me. Slander is when it's in print. Libel is when it's vocal. And it's a lot harder to charge someone with this or make a case against someone with this for libel or slander if you're a public official. By being a public official, you're like opening yourself up to this. And it has to be very blatant. Like the only way you're going to really get someone is if there's just complete disregard for the truth. And good luck. Good luck. The next one is your freedom of assembly, which is also usually generally associated with your right to protest or have a demonstration. It's your right of free association to be a part of a group. In 1958, the federal government went after the NAACP trying to figure out who its members were because it didn't like a lot of what they were doing. And the Supreme Court said, nope, can't do that. They're protected. But those protections also exist for groups like the KKK, which makes this sometimes pretty controversial. The second half of the PowerPoint really focuses on this freedom of assembly. So I don't want to spend too much time on it. Let's get on down that way. Yeah, NAACP versus Alabama. A quote just to think about: your rights to swing, my right to swing my fist ends where your nose begins. I always get that one wrong. But it's just a thought to think about. I have a friend that loves to say that when talking about anything in politics. So this next little half is going to look at privacy. It's going to look at things we're going to talk about, like how important are your rights of assembly? What can the government do to ensure national security? And how free are you really in the United States of America? So we know that we're guaranteed the right to assemble and to bring any of our grievances to the public. However, there's always this question of balance between freedom and security. So there's this thing called time, place, manner regulations. The government can make any rules that enforces the time, place, and manner of an assembly. So like having to have a permit to have some kind of an assembly, or saying you can't have any kind of assembly outside of a school during school times or outside of a court. The important thing to know is that these rules have to be content neutral. They can make as many rules as they want, but they can't about what the assemblies are about. They can only make rules about time, place, and manner. We're going to look at a few other Supreme Court cases. So So we're actually just going to skip past this one for now. To the extreme, this cartoon can definitely be what those time, place, and manner rules could be taken to. And some people think that this is good, that people should have a right to voice their opinions, but it shouldn't disturb other people's rights to go about their days calmly. While others think that if you're restricting things to this point, then no one is really free to make their opinions known. So, thoughts. Those of you in class will be sharing them. So private property becomes a whole nother ballgame. You have a right to assemble, but you cannot trespass. There are many states that actually require public places like Walmart to allow people to protest on their property. The Supreme Court held that states can have laws like this. They're not required to, but they can. We talked about that right of association. It's in red. It's important. One of the big things there is that these groups are not only allowed to exist, but there are no rules about who they can or can't let in. So they're allowed to set their own rules like that. There can't be laws about that say you have to let people in regardless of who they are. They can set their own guidelines. And sometimes that's very unpopular. I remember in 2011 when the Boy Scouts of America made the decision to allow openly gay people into scouting. And people were really upset because people were really upset prior to that they didn't. And when it went to the Supreme Court ruled that the Boy Scouts had a right to deny access because they were a private group. Very controversial. Yeah. You're allowed to be private in the groups you're a part of. The government groups aren't required to give their memberships over to the government, even if it's the NAACP or the KKK, groups that the government would love to have or would have loved to have more information on. So what is privacy? The UN recently recognized it as a human right, but it's essentially the idea of being able to be left alone, be anonymous, to control who has access to your information. That's big, bold steps. But yeah, click the button 1,000 times because I set this up wrong. There are a million different kinds of privacy. Do you own a gun? What is your family doing? How much money do you make? What political party do you belong to? Where are you going? Where are you going on vacation? You're allowed to keep all this stuff personal. Those are your personal information. And it is agreed upon by the Supreme Court that our right to privacy is inherent to the Constitution, balanced in the First, Third, Fourth, and Fifth Amendments. I am not reading these. But you can see where it is in the Constitution and the Supreme Court cases that are related to it. We're going to be looking at several of these, not all this week, because, dear God, you would never remember them all. I just wanted to point out how many Supreme Court cases there are that have to do with these rights of privacy. These rights are changing rapidly with technological innovations. Our lives on the internet are changing almost daily at this point, it feels like sometimes. And as these changes happen, our understandings of what is privacy and what are our rights on the internet change. And I'd like to say we're on top of it, but as a society, we're still trying to figure out what all these privacies are and what are your protections, what are your rights. So for brevity, I've skipped over some slides. Please look at them in your own time. It's not that they're not that important, but they're not critical for what you all need to know. The Patriot Act, however, is. It's actually called the USA Patriot Act. It's actually an acronym. Fun fact. And it was passed right after 9/11. I realize that happened before you all were born. And it was supposed to counteract terrorism. It was supposed to help fight it, make it easier for law enforcement to do their job. It was designed to force the FBI and the CIA to play nice and share information together because they don't like each other. They don't get along, even though they play for the same team. But it did this by granting the government enormous powers in terms of being able to monitor U.S. citizens. Gave them rights to search secretly and to do searches without warrants and never tell you that they were there if you're a suspected terrorist. Their ability to do sweeping tapping phone taps. I'm sorry, I'm struggling with words in this video, guys, and I apologize. Oh, words are hard today. But it gives them the ability to track your location and to track what you're doing online extensively, to record your phone calls and your internet activity. And they can draw so much information about you from this stuff. And it is super controversial. It was passed in a hurry. And I don't want to talk too much about it. There's the next thing on here is a video about it. But the question is this justified, or is this a violation of our rights? One of the things I'm going to look for in your notes is an answer to this question. Take a moment and scroll down your thoughts. Is this justified, or is this a violation? Why or why not? The next slide is a video. So before you do that, you might want to watch this video. It's only 5 minutes. It is the History Channel, and I know they're not considered the most reputable of sources anymore. But this was a pretty well laid out video. Take a moment and watch it. We'll probably talk about this in class next week. If you're in person, the few of you that are. If you're not, be prepared to share your thoughts on Canvas. But go ahead and scroll your notes down on this, and I'll be looking for that. All right. Guys, enjoy your week. I hope you found this somewhat helpful. I'm going to post some additional slides on here. Feel free to check them out. Have a good one.